Thank you, President Betty. We all know our guest today, John Armbrust, who is serving as the Executive Director of the Governor's Military Council. You may have seen some information coming out. It was a very timely presentation. John's going to tell us about the potential for troop productions. It's good to see we have some members of the John Armbrust fan club here today, and so I know. So I'll keep it brief so we can hear from John about this important topic. John, thanks.
Nice. Well, I have to tell you that normally I try to start out with a joke, but it's been so busy that I told President Betty that I got down here and I opened the folder and I thought I brought the wrong one. It's just a bunch of notes. It isn't a speech. So I about panicked, but I did bring the right one. I just had the wrong sheet of paper on top. I hope you all had a good 4th of July. I do want to tell you one thing that happened at our house. We had our entire family there, which isn't that big. We had 2 sons and they're both married with 2 kids. And we were at the table about ready to eat. And one of my granddaughters was just sitting there and just throwing it down like mad. And her mother said, you know, wait a minute. You know, we always wait. We say grace and then we all eat. And my granddaughter looked up without even stopping and said, yeah, but we're at Grandma's house and she knows how to cook.
She needs to watch that video.
I go, whoa. We hadn't said grace and I was eating. Well, what I want to do today, by the way, thanks for being here. I'm not so sure I deserve to have even 2 in a fan club, but what I want to do is not just talk about the decision in terms of what the numbers are, and I'll do that first so those of you who haven't heard know what they are. But what I really want to talk about is the context of those numbers, and then some things that are going to be just as important to us in this region that are kind of happening nationally that we all need to track together, and then kind of our game plan from here on out. So again, context, some other things that kind of fit into that, and then our game plan. The numbers, the announcement, I think it's out. I felt like it was kind of impertinent that I was sitting there reading my phone while the video was playing, but I keep getting more stuff. So you're getting it live. But the numbers that came out for Fort Riley is they're going to be reduced by 615 active duty soldiers. I will tell you, I expected around 800, so I'm very pleased that that number is lower than many people thought it would be. There are going to be reductions in the civilian workforce, but we don't know the details on that. We know the Army is probably going to reduce overall by about 17,000 civilians. But the folks that I pay attention to say that probably won't come out for a couple of months. So my guess is you'll hear it tomorrow, but that's okay. I don't think you'll hear it for a while. But I just want to make sure right up front that you realize that those civilian cuts are just as important to our economy, or maybe even more so, than the active duty cuts. So we want to pay attention to those. But it's the active duty that we're talking about today. So let me give you a little bit more perspective about the cuts. Fort Riley in 2001 had on the post 2% of the Army's active duty soldiers. This year they're at 3.1%. In 2017 it'll be 3.3%. So while we've taken some reductions, understand that the Army is shrinking faster than Fort Riley. Fort Riley has demonstrated it has great value to the Army. And in fact, percentage-wise, we're kind of growing. As a matter of fact, if you look at the number of soldiers assigned to Fort Riley in 2001 versus where it will be in 2017, it's a 57% increase. That's really pretty good when you look at all of them. There are some installations that are a little bit higher, but you got to look at the mission of the installation to really make that number totally relevant. So that's one part of the context I want you to know, is that we're taking reductions. It's small. It's really smaller than I thought it would be. But percent-wise, Fort Riley's really in the game. And we should be very proud of that and very happy with that result. The other thing is, and I think you know this, but this announcement today is one of 3 announcements in terms of cuts. We already experienced that first announcement, and that was when the active duty Army went from 570,000 soldiers to 490,000 soldiers. Fort Riley lost the 4th Brigade, but because of, in that cut, but because of the Army transforming and actually building larger brigades, we only lost 800 to 1,000 soldiers in that downsizing. So now we have this cut, which is taking the Army from 490,000 active duty soldiers to 450,000 active duty soldiers. I have never been fearful of this particular cut. I've always thought we'd do fine. It's the 3rd cut that worries most everybody that works this kind of business, because that will take the Army, they think, to 420,000 or lower active duty soldiers. I contend, and this is just me, that if they go that level, the Army is going to have to somewhat reorganize, and they will lose a division flag, I believe. They have 10 divisions, and they'll go down to 9, is what my guess is. That makes us vulnerable, just like the other 10 divisions, but we tend to play in the bottom half of the decision cycle. Fort Stewart, Fort Carson, Fort Drum, and Fort Riley tend to be the places they look first. So I've always been a little more concerned about that 3rd decision set than I have the 2nd one. But I want you to keep in mind that while today's decision is exciting, and it really is, and we should celebrate, but we have to keep on keeping on, because that 3rd decision may have to come out, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. I want you to also know how I start to assess this, and I really haven't had time to assess it yet. I just know the numbers. This is how I do it. I work with other people in other states and in DC to kind of do this. But one of the first things I do is look at other forts that have comparable missions to see how they turned out in this decision set. And we're right there with the ones that I worry about, Fort Stewart, Fort Carson, those kinds of posts. I'm a little disappointed, to be quite honest. Fort Drum is only losing about 30 soldiers. That bothers me in terms of the 3rd decision set, but we'll work that later. But overall, we did, I think, pretty well in terms of how other posts with like missions did. The next thing I look at is really what I call how many people are authorized out at Fort Riley active duty soldiers versus how many are actually out there, because you don't always fill up all your authorizations. But more importantly to me, and I think it's a much larger number, is you have all those deployments. And so from what I can tell this last year, we've had an authorization someplace close to 17,000, 17,500 soldiers authorized. We typically have had someplace around 14,500 to 15,000. So there's that gap. Let's just round to 15,000 to 17,000, say there's 2,000, 2,500 gap in there. And that's important to me because when you take 615, you really had a little cushion. Now it depends on where they're going to come out. I really don't know all the units that they're going to come from. I think it's going to be kind of a salami slice out there. I don't think any one unit's going to take all those cuts. I think you're going to see some come out of headquarters, some come out of the brigade. I think there's a battalion that's going to probably get a pretty good hit. There's some other things that are going to happen. So I look at that and I say, you know, from our perspective, from the state local economy perspective, probably not a very big issue, the 615. Because quite frankly, when we lost the 4th Brigade, economically in this region, we didn't feel it. When those 800 to 1,000 left. We thought if we did, it was very, very specific places that got felt, but not in general. I mean, our sales tax in Manhattan kept going up. So I think that, you know, we locally will not feel the impact of this cut too terribly much. I think the other thing I then look at is who is it that's going to leave when we take a reduction like this? Is it going to be senior officers? Is it going to be senior enlisted? Is it going to be junior enlisted? Are they married and living in the community with children in schools? Or are they young enlisted soldiers that are not married living in barracks on the fort? That would be a huge difference to us locally in terms of its impact. So we're going to have to assess those kinds of things. And then always, which doesn't tend to make the news, and I understand that, is we're always trying to add units out there. We always kind of refer to them as the IDUs, the itty bitty units. But they can range any place from 15 people to 200 people. And they're continuing to happen at Fort Riley. So my point to you is put all this in context. I think we did well in comparison. We had some margin to play around with out there in terms of assigned versus authorized. And we're not quite sure who all these are, but my guess is there's going to be a lot of younger soldiers, and that'll make a real difference to the local economy. So that's kind of how I look at it in that context. And I think that we should be very happy with what happened out there in the decision made. Because I will tell you there are some other installations that are taking significantly larger cuts. So for right now, we're very good. I think though that while we're excited about that and we need to pay attention to the numbers, and we'll get more information out as we can actually analyze it, there are some things going on in Washington, D.C., believe it or not, that we need to watch because they're very important. And they will have a very direct impact on Fort Riley. So let me kind of work through about 5 of those for you. And why I want to do that is I want you, along with me, to watch what happens as we look at the various media that we look at every day to see what's going on. The first thing that we need to watch is the Budget Control Act in 2011. And you go like, oh man, I can see where this is going. Yeah, I about fell asleep too when I think about that in one sense. But it's very important because there's 2 parts to that. And I think I talked to you about that the last time. There was for the Department of Defense about $500 billion that they lose over a 10-year period, no matter what. It has nothing to do with sequestration. Then there's another $500 billion that you can add to that if there's full sequestration. That's $1 trillion. That's what's driving that third decision set, is if we don't get rid of sequestration. Now, the debate that we need to watch is one side says, look, we have already reached the debt limit. Matter of fact, we've gone well below the debt limit that the Budget Control Act was put in place for. Doesn't get rid of it, it was just trying to take the debt limit down. It's gone below that. So there are a group of people that say we should just get rid of the Budget Control Act. On the other side, there are now 5 or 6 studies out there that predict by 2040, our national debt will be over 100% of our gross domestic product. And that group says you can't get rid of the Budget Control Act, or if you do, you've got to replace it with something that does exactly the same thing, so just leave what you have in place. Now, why does that affect Fort Riley? Well, what's going on within the Department of Defense right now are discussions, and I was in those discussions about 10 days ago in DC, is what's the base of the future? What's it look like? How do you downsize? How do you make the footprint of every installation, including Fort Riley, smaller? How do you move that fence line in? So I will tell you the results of the discussions of the Budget Control Act will have a significant impact right here in this region in Fort Riley. And we're just going to have to wait and see what those kinds of discussions lead to. The second thing then, once you kind of see where that's headed, is you look at the new military strategy. The new military strategy, there's 2 points I would make. One is they talk about what they call a hybrid threat. That's a threat where you fight a state actor like China or the Soviet or Russia, and non-state actors, ISIS. but sometimes they get combined. So what does that take in terms of a military force? Not just the Army, but the Air Force, the Marines, the Navy, Coast Guard. Well, we need to watch that debate, because what we now have left on Fort Riley are heavy brigade combat teams. So what's the role of a heavy brigade combat team in the new military strategy? That's not been determined yet. We'll watch it. You need to watch it if you hear things about it, because that's going to have a significant impact on Fort Riley. The third thing is our favorite friend, Base Realignment and Closure, BRAC. One of the things I did in the last 10 days was there, I attended a conference, this Association of Defense Communities, and it was very surprising. That's a very specialized group of people. There's about 500, 600 from across the nation, and they asked the question, do you think that BRAC should be authorized, or we should continue to do year-to-year budgets that have all this uncertainty? And over 90% said we should have a base realignment and closure. That's pretty significant, especially since we had congressmen and professional staff members there from the Hill. They talked to us later and said, that opens a door for us that we didn't know would be open. Is that groups like you are saying we want base realignment and closure rather than what we have today. Now that's not saying anybody likes BRAC, but it's saying it's a better alternative than what we're going through right now, because you can follow what's going on and you have a much stronger voice. There's higher risk, but it was clear that most surveys are ready to take that risk. So I would tell you that it's always been a question of when, not if. But that when is now kind of in a box, and we kind of know probably in the next 5 years, unless there's a significant change, that that's going to occur. And we're not getting resistance from the Hill on that. It'll be after the elections before anything formally comes out. So we're going to watch that, because that clearly can have a huge impact directly right here on Fort Riley. The fourth thing that we need to watch is there's changing leadership. There's changing leadership from this local level all the way to the very top. Every general at Fort Riley will be new in September, or close to that. So we have 4 new generals. Most of the brigade commanders are changing over. At the upper end, we have a new Chief of Staff of the Army, a new Secretary of the Army, a new Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a new Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a new Assistant to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All that makes a difference. We've been working hard to get everybody kind of on the same page for Fort Riley, and now we have to start over. We have to start over locally, and we have to start over nationally. That can affect Fort Riley, unless we can get them all back on the same page that we tried to get everybody else on. And finally, the thing that we need to watch is there's a congressionally mandated National Commission on the Future of the Army. Now, fortunately for us, the chairman of that is General Retired Carter Ham. Some of you may remember him. When he was a 2-star general, he was the commanding general at Fort Riley. So I bother him as often as I can, because this commission is going to look at 2 things. They're going to look at the mix between active duty Army and the reserve component in the Army, the Guard and the reserves. And they're going to see if there are missions that should go from the active to the Guard or reserve, or vice versa. Are we going to put reserve component soldiers, more of them, on our posts and do joint training? How is that going to turn out? That can have a really big impact here on Fort Riley. Part of that discussion has to do with what the Army calls their aviation restructuring initiative. We have one of five remaining combat aviation brigades. 1 of 5. There were 7, now there are 5. It happened fairly quickly. So we are very interested in that discussion about that restructuring of the aviation. Because we've already lost the Kiowas, they're supposed to be replaced by Apaches, and that's all tied up in budgets and things like that. So we're going to watch that very carefully. So what I hope I've done in the second part is let you know that there's a lot of other things we should be watching. I'd be watching what happens with the national debt. It has a huge impact. Can impact the size of Fort Riley. We need to look at the military strategy. How does that affect what we have on Fort Riley? We need to watch base realignment and closure. Could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, but it looks like it's coming sooner than most people thought. Okay? We need to look at this changing leadership because it really muddies the water from a given perspective. And then this commission on the future of the Army could have a huge impact. So I just wanted you to know that besides this decision, there's a lot of other things that are still going on. So what are we doing? What's our game plan? Well, we aren't changing it. It's the same as it's always been. And that is, we want to make sure we know and can articulate the value of Fort Riley to the Army. Let me be very clear, we are not worried about the value of Fort Riley to the local communities. We know it's huge. We have numbers. It's irrelevant. What's relevant is the value of Fort Riley to the Army and to military strategy. So we have been working to develop that, to understand where we are, and to be able to articulate that. And then we have to take that story to every place that we can. And you will see more things coming out, probably more articles written to get more visibility into the great things that are happening here at Fort Riley. We will also connect the dots, as I call it, in Kansas. Fort Riley is not an island unto itself in Kansas. It has a very strong interface with Fort Leavenworth. It has a very strong interface with the Guard and Smoke Hill Weapons Range. It has an interface with Forbes Field. We want to make sure that the Army is aware that when they make a decision about Fort Riley, they're affecting a whole bunch of other things. And a lot of places are not doing that, and that really gives us a leg up when we make that happen. And the final thing is what we all can do here, and these are business partnerships. We do a good job of putting our arm around them and telling them how much we love the soldiers. That's nice. Continue. It builds some relationships. But at the end of the day, the thing we need to do is what we did and talked about in the listening session at Fort Riley in February, which is build partnerships that increase the value of Fort Riley to the Army. And these are business relationships. They're not social relationships. So I'm going to stop and take Q&A because I may have missed something or some direction you wanted to go. Doesn't have to be about what I've talked about. Anything, I'll be glad to make it up if I don't know. But anyway, I'll be glad to take some Q&A.
What's your expectation of the time frame for BRAC and for the third part of that decision?
I expect BRAC authorized within the next 2 to 3 years, and then that's usually a 2 to 3 year process to a couple of years after that. So
And what about the third leg of the cuts?
Well, it took 2 years to go 570, 490. The projections will take 2 years to go 490 to 450,000. So I would expect around 2018 would be when we're looking at a decision like that.
How did Fort Leavenworth and McConnell fare?
Well, McConnell, this is just an Army decision, so McConnell really wasn't a part of it. But now that you brought them up, I'm not real worried about them because they have the new tanker, air refueling tanker. So that kind of puts us up there. We got some other issues on there, but they aren't showstoppers. Fort Leavenworth lost about 60 soldiers. In a relative sense, I'm trying to get those numbers because I don't have the, I don't have the percents that that I had for Fort Riley. I probably have them on my desk now, but 60. So that's not too bad. In Kansas overall, we stayed under 700 reduction, which is very good.
John, you applied it, but just an amplification, as I understand it, this is all active duty. Guard and reserve for this decision was not touched. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, we'll just screen. Yeah, Phil, I think that's true. There are going to be Guard and reserve cuts, and I think they'll be announced separately. Now, I'm not sure they're going to be part of this decision set or a little bit later, but there will be Guard and reserve cuts, not nearly as significant as the active duty. I'll just hold on to it. Not nearly as big as the active duty. The civilians, like I said, the announcement's going to be Army overall 17,000. I I think those reductions will be talked about later, but they're actually part of this decision set. Does that clarify a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? Yes.
John, why all of this massive administrative changes? Why is all that coming together?
You mean like all the senior leadership changes?
Right.
It's just the normal rotation of stuff. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but you know, somebody will get extended for 3 months, somebody else gets cut 3 months, and then all of a sudden they're all leaving at the same time. You know, we've had leadership out here, they all were deployed. They came in a little bit before that. They're now all going to go on to other assignments. It just happens that way. If you want stable leadership that rotates on a basis where you can have a little more control, you have to stop being in wars. No, I mean, it sounds silly, but that really has an effect, and it'll just jump on. So nobody likes it, but it's the one we have to live with. Like,
John, you haven't mentioned the change of commander-in-chief. What impact that might have?
Yeah, that's a good question. And is there another one? Now, you know, let me tell you just, I don't know where it'll go. But I talked about one thing, which is base realignment and closure, and I don't think it'll be authorized until we have a new commander-in-chief, and I think it makes a little difference whether it's a Democrat or Republican. I think they'll just wait until that election's over. Other than that, I'm not going to hazard a guess.
John, which fort took the biggest hit and why?
I don't know. It's here. It's been buzzing. I've got it. I just haven't seen it all. I just realized before I got up here, so I was looking at the phone, I just got the list of all the cuts. And I don't know, but there are some that are in the 3,500 range and that kind of thing.
Wow.
I think, I don't know what to tell you about that. Some of it's what I call leveling. You know, we lost 2 brigades out of the 1st Division when the first decision said. What we keep forgetting is that the 1st Division had a brigade on Fort Knox, Kentucky that also was shut down. So we became a 2-division post, and I think what you're going to find is there's more 2-division posts now. So some of it's leveling, some of it has to do with mission transformation. I think we got time for one more.
Any impact on the hospital that we know of?
No, I don't think with this cut, I don't think that's a player anymore at all. In terms of the hospital, we're all ready for it to open. I think they're actually moving some stuff in, but it shouldn't impact the hospital per se. Hey, thank you very much.